Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Now, let's talk about, we're looking at some of the oldest manuscripts of the Quran that were discovered. Let's talk about the Paris manuscript. What do you find unique about the Paris manuscript?
Let me introduce it by the physical copy.
Okay.
This is published by IRCICA, IRCICA, and one can look up their website, ircica.org. This is an organization in Turkey that has been publishing a lot of Quranic manuscripts. Sometimes they supply it together with a CD as well, inserted into the inside cover. So the contents of the book is also on the CD. What they have done is that they've taken the old manuscript and they have shown it on one side of the two-page spread, and on the other side they show the old writing now rewritten using modern Arabic script.
Okay.
So it becomes easier to read. Otherwise, it takes a little bit of retraining to read the older script. Some of the letters are shaped slightly differently than we're accustomed to today. So most Muslims have learned to read the Quran even if they do not know the Arabic language, but they've been shown the Arabic letters. They've been told this is Aleph, that's Ba, that's Ta, and they have a particular shape. So here you might find, for example, the Noon is shaped slightly differently, and the Qaf at the end of a word is shaped slightly differently. Just the tail hangs a little differently. It hangs like a squiggle as opposed to a nice little curve at the bottom.
So is the script different than we've used previously? I know that in the past there were different kinds of scripts that were used.
Well, yes, there were different scripts over generations. So the script has evolved. It's almost like we have italics and we have regular font. We have serifs and we have sans serif. There are different fonts in the English language as well. So you can think of these as different fonts. But if we look at some old English font, like a Gothic font, it might take you a moment to just
figure out what it says.
And even if you get a wedding invitation and you look at some of the letters, like, things are curved so many times in so many different ways that at first glance, some of the letters might seem a little bit different than you're accustomed to seeing. So in a similar way, you have to retrain yourself to read the ancient script. But when we do that, we see that basically what we have here in this ancient text is the consonantal outline, the skeleton text in our Qurans as we have it now. There are some mistakes of the hand. Human beings have copied this, and we are accustomed to books running off a printing press. So if 1 million copies are printed, all of them are going to look exactly alike, word for word, letter for letter. With ancient manuscripts, whether it be of the Quran or the Bible or any other document, when people copy by hand, their eyes grow tired, their hands grow tired, they have personal fatigue. We have cases where people have transcribed biblical manuscripts, and then in the margins they're complaining about the weather because as they're writing, it's just like we might doodle, they get distracted because they're human beings. So what happens in writing the manuscript, practically for the page that they're writing, is that somebody may skip a line because especially if there is a similar word at the end of the line that they just finished copying, if that same word occurs later on down the page, when they get back to looking at the page, like let's say they got to the end of a line, they went to dip their pen in the ink pot, or writing instrument in the ink pot. When they come back and they look for the place where they stopped and they see that word lower down the page, they may copy from that point onwards, skipping a few lines.
So we see those sorts of mistakes in this manuscript? We see that sorts of mistakes, not necessarily in that specific mistake in this manuscript, but those are the kinds of mistakes that we see occurring. So you might find that the copyist got to the end of the line and he actually repeated the same word in the next line because he finished writing that word, but by the time he maybe re-inked his nib and so on, he has forgotten. So what we find most often is that sometimes a word is forgotten, a person has forgotten the word, or he has written the word twice, or we also find differences in spelling because spelling of words can evolve evolve over time. It is noted in the Islamic tradition that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was not taught to read or write. So he obviously was not in a position to check the manuscripts of his companions. And various companions of the Prophet may have written down pieces of the Quran using the spelling conventions that they were familiar with. And you find...
I guess spelling wasn't standardized at that time as it is now. Like, you look at a dictionary now, you can find the spelling, but back then it wasn't like that.
And of course, even in our English language, you can have different spellings evolving in different parts of the world. For example, the word color is in Canada O-U-R, whereas in the United States is O-R. So we have an extra U. But nobody complains and says, hey, you got an extra letter there in your text. And in fact, when the New International Version of the Bible was published, there were two versions published. And of course, there are two versions published, the American version and the UK version. The UK version has the extra U's there to spell the way according to UK convention. But no one is going to say, hey, this is a different Bible because it's got an extra U there. We know it's a different edition for a good purpose, and it's not changing the meaning or message of the text by including that accommodation for different spelling. So we find differences of that nature.
Are there any significant variations?
No, there is no significant variation. Nothing that changes what Muslims believe or changes the practices of Muslims or even the basic text as we're reading it. For example, if I read a passage here from the first chapter of the Quran towards the end, we'll be at a passage that many Muslims have either memorized themselves or they have heard again and again. For example, tell me if this sounds familiar. Now, I can read it from the simplified Arabic, which is modern, and that's easy for me. But I can also try to go to the old text, which requires, as I said, a little bit of retraining. But hopefully we can do that as well. So let's see if we can do that. With verse number 285. So I'm trying to catch my place by looking at the simplified version first, and here we go. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. And then the end of that surah.
So when is this manuscript dated to?
This manuscript is dated according to Dr. Altikulac, who put this together in this format, towards the end of the first century of Islam. Now, Francois de Roche, who has become known as an expert in the field of early Quranic manuscripts, has written a book entitled Qurans of the Umayyads, and his best estimate is that this may have been penned in the first 2 decades of Umayyad rule. Now, Umayyad rule, the Umayyad Caliphate, began in the year 661 with the demise of Ali, one of the righteous and rightly guided caliphs, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So from 661 to 681, those are the 2 decades. Now, this means within 30 to 50 years after the death of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And that would mean that this was penned within the lifetime of many who knew the Prophet, peace be upon him, and lived and walked with him and knew what the Quran was. And even this, according to Francois de Roche, looking at the ways in which things are copied in this manuscript, it's obvious to a trained scholar in the field that this manuscript was not written from memory. It's written by following an exemplar. See, one tells the kinds of mistakes that one is looking at, whether the person is writing from memory. There's different kinds of mistakes that are made than if one is writing and copying from an exemplar.
That's interesting.
And the differences between the exemplar and this is that some things have been written in a simpler way to make it easier for readers to grasp the pronunciation quicker. So, for example, a simple thing would be the inclusion of an alif that gives us the long A. In English, by comparison, we have the A in cat, which is short, cat, and the A in car, which is long, car. But they're both written the same way. But if, at a glance, if one didn't know the language and didn't know the words, one would not know, is this a long A or a short A? So in Arabic, there is a way of writing the long A with and what is called the alif, the first letter of the Arabic alphabet. So sometimes something like this is included in this copy to make it easier for the reader to grasp right away that this is, for example, a long A. But that sort of change, which is shown in this this manuscript, alerts François de Roche to the idea that this is copied from an exemplar which did not have that feature, and that means that this Quran is similar to what was there before. And if this was written with, at the latest, about 50 years after the death of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and is copying from a prior exemplar, that would have been earlier still, and it's basically the same Quran. Now, to be sure, this is not the entire Quran. This is what I hold in my hands here is approximately a quarter of the Quran.
Okay.
The entire document, which is the entire Quran, well, let's put it a different way. What is called now the Paris Manuscript is part of a larger document that François de Roche calls the codex Parisino-petropolitanus. The reason for the long name is that only a part of it survives in Paris, but the rest of it is scattered in various other museums and libraries. And altogether, that makes up about 33% of what was originally a complete Quran, a complete copy of the Quran.
We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Shabir. I know there's so much more you could say.
You're welcome.